John had always believed his farm was his sanctuary, a small patch of earth where time moved slower and worries melted away with the morning mist. The gentle rustle of corn stalks, the warm clucking of his chickens, and the earthy scent of fresh soil were the heartbeat of his life. This land was his legacy, passed down through generations, and despite the pressures of modern development creeping closer every year, John held on to it like a lifeline. That calm shattered one gray morning, when a plain white envelope slipped under his front door. The official HOA logo stared back at him, cold and impersonal. He frowned, heart skipping a beat. The last time he'd heard from the Homeowners Association was years ago, a brief notice about parking rules. Nothing more. Now, the letter felt like a crack in his world. John tore it open, his fingers tightening as he read the words. Dear homeowner, this letter serves as the first official notice regarding violations on your property. Immediate corrective action is required to avoid penalties and further legal consequences. But that was all. No details, no list of violations, no deadline. Just an ominous warning that made his stomach twist. He blinked and reread the letter, convinced he must have missed something. The farm was spotless, the fences repaired last month, and his small vegetable garden meticulously maintained. He couldn't imagine what rule he had broken. A knot tightened in his chest. Later that day, as John checked his mailbox again, his fears deepened. Another notice, crisp and official, demanding paperwork he never knew he needed. Then another. And another. Within days, the notices piled up like a relentless storm, 37 in total, each one more aggressive, threatening fines, legal action, even the loss of his beloved property. The messages blurred together in their cold formality, citing obscure HOA covenants, vague zoning restrictions, and impossible-to-meet requirements. John's neighbors watched with thinly veiled concern. Mrs. Alvarez from across the street shook, her head sadly whispering about how the HOA had recently grown too strict. His closest friend Tom warned, "This Karen woman on the HOA board, she's a nightmare." But John had never met Karen, nor understood the political undercurrents swirling beneath the community's calm surface. He spent long nights poring over HOA rulebooks and covenants, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The more he read, the more confused he became. Many of the violations cited in the notices contradicted each other. Some referred to forms John had never been told existed. Others accused him of unauthorized construction on land that hadn't changed in years. It felt like an impossible puzzle, one designed to trap him. John's unease grew into a quiet dread. Someone was targeting him. But who? And why? He remembered the last HOA meeting he had reluctantly attended months ago. The room was filled with polite smiles and rehearsed statements. But one woman stood out. Karen, a sharp-eyed woman with a clipped voice and an air of authority that brooked no argument. Rumors around town whispered that Karen was the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, wielding her power like a hammer. Now, with these mounting notices, John wondered if Karen was behind this storm of paperwork. But what could a woman gain by threatening a simple farmer's livelihood? His mind raced as he gazed over his land, the fields ready for planting, the barns sturdy and worn. This farm was more than property. It was his life's work, his family's, history. And it was under siege. That night, John lay awake, heart pounding, haunted by the silence of his quiet home, now shadowed by looming threats. The notices weren't just paper. They were a warning. Something bigger was coming. Something he had no idea how to fight, but fight he would. The next morning, John awoke with a heavy sense of foreboding. He knew the notices weren't going to stop. And they didn't. By the time the sun was high, a thick stack of official letters awaited him on the kitchen table. 37 in total, each one stamped with the HOA seal, each one demanding immediate action. John ran a hand through, his hair, the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders. The notices were relentless. Some accused him of failing to file the right forms for his barn repairs, others claimed unauthorized landscaping changes, and a few even mentioned improper use of agricultural land, though John had been farming this soil for decades. The language was dense and technical, carefully crafted to confuse and intimidate. Some notices contradicted the others. One said he needed a permit for a fence. Another said his fence was already out of compliance. One demanded he remove a small shed. Another accused him of illegal construction for not having that shed. John felt trapped in a maze of bureaucracy. Frustrated but determined, he tried calling the HOA office. The receptionist was polite but unhelpful, insisting he speak to the compliance officer, Karen. When John finally reached her, Karen's voice was sharp, clipped, and utterly uncompromising. "Mr. Harris, the violations are clear. You have not complied with the community covenants. Failure to address these will result in escalating fines, legal action, and potential foreclosure." John swallowed hard. "But Karen, some of these notices contradict each other. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do." "There's no excuse for non-compliance. You have 10 days to submit all the required paperwork and correct all violations," Karen said, her tone final. John hung up feeling more lost than ever. He started to walk his property, searching for anything that might have triggered this assault. His eyes scanned the rows of corn, the sturdy barn, the neat chicken coop. Everything seemed the same as always. No new buildings, no unauthorized changes. Who was behind this? Why single him out with such ferocity? Rumors swirled in the neighborhood. John learned that Karen had recently pushed for stricter enforcement. Rules no one fully understood, but that seemed designed to give her more power. Some neighbors whispered that she had personal grudges against homeowners who didn't bow to her demands. John's mind spun. The notices weren't just random, they were a calculated weapon, and Karen was wielding it. He wasn't the only target. A few neighbors admitted they'd received similar letters, but had quickly paid fines or fixed minor issues to avoid trouble. John, however, had never been the kind to back down. As days passed, the notices kept coming, each more urgent, more threatening. John was drowning in paperwork, deadlines, and mounting fines. The community felt less like a neighborhood and more like a battleground. At night, the silence of the farm was shattered by the sound of his phone buzzing, emails from the HOA legal team, ominous and formal. They hinted at liens being placed on his property. John's anxiety deepened. His home was no longer his own. Then came the day he received a letter hand-delivered by Karen herself. Her eyes cold and unwavering, Karen stood on his porch and slid a thick envelope across the table. "This is your final warning. The next step will be legal action to seize the property." John stared at the envelope, heavier than the others, containing documents he barely dared to open. As Karen turned to leave, John called out, voice shaking, "Why are you doing this?" "What have I done to deserve this?" Karen didn't look back. "You're out of compliance. It's nothing personal." But John knew better. As the sun set over his farm, the peaceful world he'd known was gone. In its place was a storm of paperwork, suspicion, and fear, and a relentless adversary named Karen, and John was left with one burning question. How far would she go to take his farm away? John couldn't shake the feeling that the woman named Karen was the heart of this nightmare. The way she moved through the neighborhood, sharp, precise, and unyielding, was like a storm cloud casting shadows over his farm. He had heard the rumors from neighbors, whispers about how Karen wielded her authority like a weapon, turning small HOA rules into chains for anyone who dared to resist. That afternoon, John decided he had to face her directly. He needed answers, not just more cryptic letters and veiled threats. He found her at the HOA office, a small, sterile building with frosted windows that felt more like a fortress than a place of community. Karen sat behind a massive desk, papers neatly stacked, her eyes cold and calculating. When she looked up, her gaze pierced right through him. "Mr. Harris," she said, voice clipped. "I see you've been receiving the notices." John swallowed hard. "Karen, I don't understand what you want from me. The farm hasn't changed." "I've tried to comply, but the notices are confusing, contradictory. Why are you pushing so hard?" Karen leaned back, steepling her fingers. "The HOA's role is to protect the community's standards. You've repeatedly failed to comply with essential covenants. It's not personal. It's about order, rules." John's jaw tightened. "But these rules, you're twisting them. I've been farming this land for years without issue. You're using paperwork as a weapon to strip me of what's mine." Karen's eyes flashed cold fire. "This isn't a game, John. The community has standards. If you won't follow them, there will be consequences." As their conversation grew more heated, John realized Karen wasn't just an enforcer. She was a zealot, driven by something deeper than rules. Her relentless pursuit felt personal, like she wanted to break him. After he left the office, John's mind raced. What could Karen possibly gain from this? The farm was modest, not a sprawling estate with a mansion or fancy developments. There had to be more beneath the surface. That evening, John spoke with neighbors in hushed tones. Mrs. Alvarez, a longtime resident, revealed Karen's reputation. A former corporate lawyer who joined the HOA board years ago, determined to clean up the community, but infamous for bullying tactics and a thirst for control. Others spoke of mysterious land deals and rumors of plans to reshape the neighborhood for profit. John's suspicion deepened. Was Karen part of something bigger? Was the assault on his farm just a piece of a larger, darker puzzle? Then came the final blow, a letter stamped urgent, demanding John attend a special HOA hearing. Karen's name was prominently listed as the lead enforcer. John's heart pounded. The hearing wasn't just a meeting, it was a showdown. He had to prepare for the fight of his life. In the days before the hearing, John discovered Karen had amassed a mountain of documentation against him. Hundreds of pages of alleged violations, contradictory claims, and even a surprising accusation that John had illegally subdivided his property, an act that could immediately void his ownership. John was stunned. He knew this wasn't true. There had been no subdivisions, no sales, no new property lines. This wild claim felt like a lie, a weapon fabricated to justify seizure. Fear and determination battled inside him. If Karen's accusations were accepted, John could lose everything overnight. But if he fought, he risked making an enemy who had the power and ruthlessness to crush him. The farm, once a quiet refuge, now felt like a battlefield. The air seemed heavier, every shadow hiding a threat. As the hearing day drew near, John's neighbors watched nervously. Some offered quiet support. Others whispered that standing up to Karen was dangerous. John looked out over his fields as the sun set, the golden light fading into dusk. This fight was no longer just about paperwork or rules. It was about survival. The morning of the HOA hearing arrived like a thunderstorm on the horizon, dark, heavy, and full of ominous promise. John's heart hammered in his chest as he gathered his scattered papers, worn notebooks, and the little evidence he had managed to collect. Every second felt like a countdown to a verdict that could destroy his family's legacy. But there was one thing he hadn't told anyone yet. The discovery he made late the night before. While digging through old HOA records, hidden files, obscure meeting minutes, and scanned documents tucked away in the digital archives, John had found something explosive. A forged document bearing Karen's signature, accusing him of illegally subdividing his farm into smaller parcels to skirt community rules. A claim so wild it could only be a lie. His breath hitched as he read the falsified property maps and altered signatures. The paper was a weapon, carefully crafted to build a case against him. John's mind raced. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or a paperwork error. It was an orchestrated attack, designed to strip him of his farm by bending the rules, twisting facts, and manufacturing evidence. He knew that if he could expose this document during the hearing, he might turn the tide. But how could he prove it was fake without the right expertise or legal muscle? With trembling hands, he reached out to an old friend, Linda, a retired paralegal who had helped neighbors with HOA disputes in the past. Late into the night, they pored over the documents, comparing dates, signatures, and official records. Linda's face grew grave. "This is a clear forgery, John. Whoever made this went to great lengths. If we present this at the hearing, it could blow the whole case wide open." John felt a flicker of hope, but also a deepening fear. Karen wouldn't give up without a fight. If he challenged her with this evidence, she might retaliate harder. More notices, more fines, or worse. The hours before the hearing slipped by in a blur of anxious preparation. John's neighbors whispered words of encouragement and worry. Some feared Karen's influence was too strong to break. Others admired John's courage to stand alone. When the day finally arrived, the community center was packed. Chairs filled with curious residents, HOA board members, and an air thick with tension. Karen entered first, her presence sharp and commanding, exuding control. John felt eyes on him, some skeptical, some supportive. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. Karen began her presentation, her voice steady and chilling as she laid out the list of alleged violations. She spoke of rules broken, covenants ignored, and repeatedly emphasized the forged subdivision claim as proof of John's bad faith. John's stomach twisted. When Karen called for the vote to begin legal proceedings, he stood. "Wait," he said firmly, holding up the forged document. "This is false. I have proof it's a forgery." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's eyes narrowed, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. John's lawyer spoke next, methodically dismantling Karen's case with facts, records, and the expert analysis of the forged papers. The tension built like a storm ready to break. But Karen wasn't finished. With a cold smile, she accused John of fabricating the evidence to buy time. The room buzzed with whispers. The community's faith wavered. John felt the weight of the moment. This was a battle not just of facts, but of wills. As the hearing stretched on, an unexpected ally stood up, a retired HOA board member who revealed Karen's history of aggressive enforcement and personal grudges. This testimony shifted the mood, tilting the scales. The hearing ended with no immediate decision, leaving the community on edge. The battle wasn't over, but John had cracked the first link in Karen's armor. As he left the room, the setting sun cast long shadows over the farm. The fight to save his land was far from finished, and the lies running deeper than anyone suspected. The hearing's ambiguous ending left the community restless and divided. Some saw John's bold move as a beacon of hope. Others whispered doubts, swayed by Karen's insinuations and her iron grip on the HOA machinery. But what unsettled John most was the uneasy feeling that Karen wasn't working alone, that her campaign against him was part of a shadowy plan bigger than any petty HOA squabble. That night the farm felt colder, the once familiar creaks and rustles now sinister. John sat at his kitchen table, the forged document spread before him, surrounded by his own notes, legal research, and emails from neighbors who had reached out in support. Yet, the question burned brighter than ever. Why was Karen so intent on seizing his land? Determined to find answers, John started digging deeper into the HOA's records, old contracts, and recent board decisions. What he uncovered stunned him. Hidden beneath layers of HOA paperwork was a secret proposal, a plan to rezone a section of the neighborhood to allow commercial development, shopping centers, luxury condos, and even a sprawling corporate farm. The rezoning documents were buried in fine print and obscure legal jargon, but the intent was clear, and John's farm stood directly in the path of this proposed development. His heart sank. It wasn't just Karen's personal vendetta, it was a corporate game. More alarming was what he discovered about Karen. Beyond her role in the HOA, Karen had ties to a powerful real estate firm that stood to profit handsomely from the rezoning. The forged subdivision document suddenly made sense. It was a pretext to discredit John, force him off his land, and clear the way for the project. John's mind raced. This wasn't just about rules. It was about money, power, and greed masked behind legal jargon. The next morning, John reached out to a local journalist known for exposing corruption. He handed over his findings: forged documents, rezoning, plans, and a trail of suspicious transactions linking Karen to developers. The journalist's eyes widened. "This could blow the whole thing wide open," she said, promising to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. Notices kept arriving, each one more aggressive, threatening liens, fines, and legal action. The pressure on John mounted, and with every letter, the community seemed to fracture further. Some neighbors feared standing with John, worried about their own properties. Others quietly rallied, organizing meetings to demand transparency from the HOA. John found unexpected allies in this growing resistance. A coalition of farmers, homeowners, and retirees who refused to be bullied. They shared stories of Karen's ruthless tactics, of neighbors who had quietly given in to fines and forfeited their properties. Despite the fear and uncertainty, John's resolve hardened. This wasn't just a fight for his farm, it was a fight to protect their community's future. But Karen was watching, always one step ahead. One evening, as John walked the edge of his property, he noticed fresh tire tracks, heavy, purposeful, leading to a corner of his farm he had never disturbed. Near the edge of the field, a new set of stakes had been hammered into the ground, marked with bright orange tape. Someone was marking his land. The message was clear. They were moving forward with plans to claim his property, with or without his consent. John clenched his fists, his breath visible in the cold night air. The battle was no longer just legal or political, it was personal, and the war for the farm was about to escalate in ways no one could have imagined. The dawn broke cold and gray over John's farm, the kind of morning where the mist clings low to the earth and silence feels heavier than usual. For John, the farm no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a war zone. The bright orange stakes from the previous night marked more than just land. They symbolized the creeping advance of a force determined to erase everything he loved. He stood staring at the stakes, his breath misting in the chill air. These markers weren't accidental. They were a blatant declaration that his land was under siege. Whoever placed them was sending a message. This farm was being carved up, piece by piece, without his consent. John's mind raced. The HOA notices, Karen's relentless attacks, the forged documents, all pieces of a sinister puzzle. He realized now that fighting the paperwork alone wouldn't be enough. This was about people, about power. And the stakes were higher than he had imagined. That day, John reached out to his coalition of neighbors. The group met at the community center, faces etched with concern and determination. Ideas flew: legal action, protests, petitions to local government officials. But all agreed on one thing: they had to expose Karen and the developers before it was too late. Linda, the retired paralegal, helped draft a formal complaint citing the forged documents and conflict of interest. Meanwhile, the journalist promised to release her investigation soon, but warned the opposition was powerful and well-connected. Despite the support, John felt isolated. Karen was everywhere, at meetings, on calls, wielding influence like a weapon. John's phone rang constantly with new threats, liens, fines, even the hint of eviction proceedings. One evening, as he returned from the fields, John found his barn door slightly ajar. A chill ran down his spine. Inside, he discovered footprints in the dirt, signs someone had been snooping around. Nothing was missing, but the intrusion was unmistakable. A warning. John's resolve hardened into something fierce. He wasn't just defending a farm now. He was defending his family's legacy, his neighbors' trust, and the soul of a community. The following week, at another HOA meeting, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Karen, impeccably poised, presented her case. Once more, calling John non-compliant and accusing him of obstructing community progress. She painted herself as the protector of neighborhood values, casting John as a stubborn outlaw. When John stood to respond, the room fell silent. "I'm not just fighting for myself," John said, voice steady but passionate. "I'm fighting for every neighbor here who wants to keep their home, their land, their voice. This farm isn't just dirt and crops. It's history, community, and heart." Some neighbors clapped, others muttered, and Karen's eyes narrowed with quiet fury. The hearing ended without resolution, but the battle lines were clear. That night, as John walked the perimeter of his farm, he noticed the stakes had multiplied. Bright, orange flags marking a swath of his land, inching closer to his barn. It was an invasion in slow motion. John's thoughts swirled. How far would Karen go? Would she risk everything to break him? Could he rally enough support in time? As the cold wind whipped through the cornstalks, John made a decision. He would fight not just with papers and petitions, but by standing his ground, no matter the cost. The farm was more than land. It was his home, and he would defend it to the last breath. The tension in the community had become a palpable force, an electric charge that made every encounter, every glance heavy with suspicion. John felt it in the wary eyes of neighbors who once greeted him warmly, now hesitant, unsure whether to stand beside him or bow to Karen's iron will. The orange stakes, multiplying across his property, were no longer just a symbol. They were a threat made real, a countdown to a deadline John couldn't ignore. The stakes represented parcels soon to be seized, bulldozers ready to carve up the land, and promises of progress that spelled ruin for everything he'd built. One cold morning, John received a call from the journalist. "We've got proof," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Emails between Karen and the developers discussing how to expedite the rezoning by pushing out non-compliant homeowners. It's worse than we thought." John's stomach churned. The web of deceit extended far beyond the HOA. This was a coordinated campaign, a calculated purge of anyone standing in the way of profit. That afternoon, a legal notice arrived. The HOA, backed by the developers, filed a formal eviction lawsuit, citing John's alleged habitual non-compliance and interference with community development. The deadline, just 2 weeks. John's world constricted. The farm, his home, everything he loved, was now on the verge of being taken by legal force. Desperation set in. He met with his small coalition late into the night, plans flowing fast, but options limited. Legal battles were expensive, slow, and uncertain. Public protests risked alienating neighbors afraid of Karen's retaliation. Yet surrender was unthinkable. John realized he needed a breakthrough, a way to expose Karen's lies and rally the community's true strength. The next day, John decided to confront Karen one last time. He found her again at the HOA office, her expression unreadable but sharp as ever. "This ends now, Karen," John said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I know about the emails, the forged documents. I know you're working with the developers to take my farm." Karen's eyes flickered briefly. Was it surprise? Fear? No. Only cold calculation. John, you're fighting a losing battle. The law is clear, the community demands progress, and your time is up. I'm not just fighting for me, John said, stepping closer. I'm fighting for the community that you're trying to sell out. You think your papers and your power can silence us, but we're stronger than you know. Karen's lips tightened. You'll regret this. Leaving the office, John felt a grim determination. The fight wasn't just legal anymore. It was a battle for truth, for justice, and for the soul of the neighborhood. In the days that followed, John's coalition grew. Neighbors who had been silent began to speak out, sharing stories of Karen's overreach and abuse of power. The journalist's expose went live, sparking outrage and calls for an independent investigation, but Karen didn't back down. The HOA doubled fines, accelerated eviction proceedings, and even called in private security to patrol the neighborhood, heightening fear and intimidation. The community was on edge, John's farm was under siege, and the tipping point was fast approaching. One night, as John sat on his porch, he heard the distant roar of engines, bulldozers moving in. The orange stakes had turned into a noose, tightening around his land. John's jaw clenched. He wasn't finished yet. The bulldozers arrived. Before dawn, their engines growling like beasts awakening from a long slumber. Orange stakes dotted the perimeter of John's farm like a sinister constellation, marking the borders of a battle neither he nor the community wanted, but were now forced to face. John stood in the cold morning air, heart pounding as machines rumbled closer. Neighbors gathered silently behind him, a quiet army of support. The journalist was there too, camera rolling, ready to capture every moment. But just as the first blade was about to tear into the earth, a convoy of official vehicles screeched to a halt at the farm entrance. Men in suits, badges gleaming, strode purposefully onto the land. John's breath caught. State investigators. The expose had forced the authorities to act. Minutes later, the investigators unfurled documents that made the gathered crowd gasp. Evidence of fraud, forged HOA documents, conflicts of interest, and even criminal conspiracy tied directly to Karen and the developers. Karen herself was nowhere to be seen. Within hours, the HOA board was suspended, and Karen was placed under investigation. The wild lie, the forged subdivision claim that had threatened to steal John's farm, had unraveled completely, exposing a tangled web of greed and deception. The eviction lawsuit was dropped, fines were rescinded, and the rezoning plans were put on indefinite hold. John's farm was safe. But more than that, the community was awakened. Neighbors, once divided and fearful, rallied around John and each other, determined to rebuild trust and restore integrity. To the HOA. In the weeks that followed, John was invited to join the new HOA board, this time with a mandate to protect homeowners, not corporate interests. Standing on his porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields, John reflected on the journey. What began as a simple dispute over paperwork had revealed something much deeper, a struggle between power and people, lies and truth, greed and community. And while the fight had been exhausting, the victory was sweeter for its hard-won nature. John smiled quietly. His farm, his home, and the spirit of the neighborhood had survived. The wild lie was defeated, and the future was theirs to shape.